Good morning and welcome to May, and here we go with our tag roulette. I hope everybody's ready. Really excited to see how loads of different people are doing this differently. Some people are a little bit like me, they're doing it on one piece. Some people have got hoops and they're splitting them up. Some people are doing them in books. It's just amazing. So let's have a look. Where are we up to with our generated numbers? So let's generate number 30. We've had 31. Right, so we've got 20. We've had 18. Oh, 19. Oh, come on, give us something a bit different. And 43. Whoa, right, okay. Let's have a look. Find the right ones on here. Right, so are we in this one? No, we're not in that one. Are we in this one? No. It's going to be the last one that I end up looking at. Oh no, 43. Where are we? 41, 42, 43. Ooh, that was a fringe. Ooh. Ooh. A fringe. And that was on a blanket. Fringe on a blanket stitch. And to this one. Number 19. Oh, words. Oh, interesting. And number 20. Oh, was a Pekingese. Right, there we have our numbers for this month. So we're going with a Pekingese stitch, words, and a fringe and blanket stitch. So I need to just toddle off and get some threads and some needles. Oops, I'm just going to chuck something on the floor. And I will be back in a second. Okay, we're back. So I pulled out some threads. I've gone for some perlays, a slightly thicker thread. This is a 30 count. It's quite a nice thick one, that one. And some of my vintage perlays and a stranded cotton. Okay, so we'll start with Pekingese stitch. So Pekingese stitch starts off with a back stitch as your foundation. So I'm going to go with a little cream thread there. So like always, I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit, and then you can always go back and look at that week's tag for a more detailed version if you needed to. Okay, so I'm going to do a little back stitch. So back stitch is where you've done a stitch, and then as the name suggests, you just go back. Just bring that down. It's a bit of a dark day today. Well, it's not a dark day, it's just the sun hasn't actually come round yet. So I feel like I'm working in the dark. I've had a few days off, which has been nice. But as always is the case, when you have a few days off, you've got a mountain to climb. All sorts of things to get done. So I'm just going to choose to go around some little shapes, I think, with my Pekingese stitch. Just to add a little bit of decoration. There we go. So there's my back stitch, and I could do this all over the place, lots of little bits. I could just do one big piece of back stitch if I wanted to. As you can see, the back of my piece is not that exciting. I'm not the neatest when it comes to the back of a piece of work. There we go. Okay, then you want a contrasting colour. So I am going to use this stranded one. Right, can we find the end? That's the question, Anne. There we go. Got it. This stranded one. I'm not going to use all 6 strands. I'm just going to use 3. Do use 6 strands sometimes, but it can just be a little bit thick. To help you with this one, it does help to use a blunt needle, because we're going to start just creating a pattern on that back stitch, but if you don't have a blunt needle, just use your needle backwards, so you just use the eye end to go back through. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come up where my first stitch is. So it's the only problem with a blunt needle, it doesn't always want to come through. There we go. Oops, no, it's come out again. So I've got a stitch at that side and a stitch at that side, and that's where I brought my needle up. Then we go up that stitch and back down the previous one. Okay, then you go up the next one, oops, up the next one, and then back down. You go underneath the 2 threads. I've gone underneath those 2 threads there. Pull that through, go on a stitch, go up that one, and then you go back down the other one and go underneath both threads. There we go. So I'm going underneath both threads. I'm sorry the light's not that cracking today. I turn that off. Does that make any difference? Then it gone in. There we go. Go a bit closer. Okay. And we sort of create these lovely little loops, so you want to keep the tension quite loose. So I'm going up the next stitch, so I'm going underneath, I'm not catching the thread or anything like that, or the fabric, and then go back down and go underneath the stitch and underneath the thread, and then again don't pull your tension too low. You can make these super loopy just by not pulling it through, or you can keep them quite tight if you want to. Just going to caught that thread, I think. There we go. Do the next one. Back underneath. I feel like my glasses are working this morning. Come on, Anne, sort your life out. Oh, sorry, that's a massive statement, ain't it, really? That's not going to be done in a few bits of stitching. Could make a difference, but it won't sort out everything. There we go. Underneath that one, back underneath that one and that one. Oh, it's a problem now, we've got loads of things on here. Just going to keep catching it on everything. There we go. We're working. And you get this really cute loopy stitch, and then to finish it, just right at the very end, just go down the back, pull your thread through. Again, make sure you don't pull it too tight, because you don't want to just get rid of all those little lovely bits of stitching that you've done, and tie it off. There we go. There. So that's our first one, which is our Pekingese stitch. What am I doing? Let's get a blunt. So you just use the eye end of your needle, you can just pull your little loops. So they'll be cute, just little bits and pieces just dotted all over. So that's the first one. The next one I'm going to do is the blanket stitch with the fringe on it. So I'm going to go back to this thread here. So again, we're going to lay down a foundation stitch for this one. So fringing obviously can be as long or as short as you want it to be. Let's move that out of the way. I think I'm probably going to do it down here. So what I want to do is a blanket stitch first. So your blanket stitch needs to have the line at the bottom. I'm using a blunt needle, that's not going to work, is it? So I'm going to turn my piece upside down, just because it makes it a little bit easier. So I want my line of my stitching maybe to be there, so you always start at the top where you want the line to be, because that's your thread that you're laying along, and then you just create the little legs of your blanket stitch. And again, you can keep these all the same or not, so you just make a stitch and make sure that that thread goes underneath your needle. It doesn't have to be a straight line, it can follow a shape, obviously, because I've chosen to have a go at not working in a hoop. Just think about the tension, and as we've done before, it's quite nice to start going over other bits and pieces, mainly because it's going to start sort of linking them all together. So the fringing, you don't have to do fringing on everything. I'm just going to do one more, maybe a little one. There we go. Pop it through to the back and just tie it off. And then you just need to decide what you're going to create your fringing with. So it's quite nice to do sort of multicolours. So if you get some threads together, find the ends. Where are we? Oh, I could never find the end of this. I find it and then I use a bit and then I lose it. And you'd think it'd just stick off. But no. Oh, there we go. Found it. So I've got one end, two ends, three ends, and then that bit of stranded cotton that I wasn't using, that I've now gone and done something with. There it is. What you can do with stranded cotton is if you hold it straight and just grab hold of a single thread and separate it. This is really good for fringing. The reason that you separate it is your stranded cotton is a twisted cotton, so by separating it you sort of loosen up the threads. So I've got 3 of those and I've got 3 of those, so all I'm just going to do is just pull myself off. Whoops, the length is about the same. There we go. Okay, so I've got my little made up stranded threads there. Let's trim the end and then just snip myself a piece, probably 4 or 5 inches long, just because it makes it a little bit easier to work with. And all you do now is make a loop, grab my blunt needle, and I'm just going to pop my needle through there. You can use a crochet hook for this if you want. So you just pull your little loop through and then just pop your tails through your loop and then pull it down. Let's grab another bit, trim, make a loop. Now you might decide to put them all together, so I might do it through the same one. Needle, pull my loop through. So I've got my loop there, I've got my tails, and my tails just go through the loop and then just pull. So just by making up sort of like your own little cord, you can pick out the colours of your actual piece. So there's some there, and I might just do a couple at the end. So you could do as many or as little as you want. The only thing you do need to think about is if, say, you did decide to put it in the middle of your piece, Just remember we've still got quite a few months to go, and it might just drive you up the wall if they're dangling in the way. Now what I would normally do with these then is trim them, but because we've not finished our piece and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with everything, I'm going to leave them that length for now, unless they start annoying me. Okay, so there is our fringing on a blanket stitch. Then the last bit we've got to do is a word. So I've got a pencil. I was going to put Tagroulette on it, but I think that's probably a little bit, I don't know whether or not to put Tagroulette, because that's I suppose what it is. I don't know. No, I'm not. I might do it later. I'm going to put some words in, so just using my pencil. And obviously you could use a fabric marker. Just I haven't got one to hand, so I'm just going to use a pencil. So, and then I might do some other words. It might be as well that I start doing other words at different times, because obviously we can come back and add anything that you want. So I'm getting a slightly darker thread, and then all I'm going to do to stitch this is just use a back stitch. Now you could, oh actually no, I could use a chain stitch. I could do a different one for each letter. Let's go for a different one for each letter, so then I can show you different things. So if you do a little chain stitch, that's where you go back down the hole you came up, make a tiny stitch, make sure that that thread goes underneath. Oops. And that makes your first little chain. Then we're doing a connected chain, so you're going to go back down inside that loop, make another stitch, make sure that thread goes underneath your needle, pull it out, make another chain. So you just keep going, make a little stitch, make sure that thread goes underneath, make a chain. The chain stitch is quite nice because it gives you a slightly thicker line. Quite nice as well, especially if you're going around curvy letters. Just adds a little bit more decoration. So as long as you just make sure that thread's pointing in the way that you're going, you sort of bring it back on itself. And then when you go back up, just make sure that your needle's going over that thread there. It'll make your chain. So you could put anything on this. I know some people are already putting words on because you've been actually doing it on like a little bit like a year hoop or in a piece with sections, and you've actually been stitching the words already because you've been putting each month on. So you're a little bit ahead of the game in that sense. Oops. Just loosen that off a bit. I'm a bit tight with that one. There we go. Right, so we've got a little chain stitch, which is a bit more of a decorative way of doing your text. Then when you get to the end, just go down the outside of your little bit of stitching. So there we've got our S. Then you can do traditional back stitch. So that's a little bit like we did for laying down the Pekingese stitch, where you start off with a stitch and you just go back and move on. So I'm just going back one and moving on. So if you get to little bits like you've got your E, you can just take your needle across diagonally at the back, make a stitch, move on, and then again I can do my back stitch, I can move it on one, and then just keep going. So if I'm going around a corner, just go diagonally in the background, come up, go. Now then when it comes to, like the W has really long lines, you can do a couched stitch. So with this one, what you would do is make your long stitch, and then you just come back up part way. So you have to lay your fabric flat for this, and then you just do a little couching stitch, just jumping over. It depends on how long your line is as to how many of these that you do, but this will just hold down that long stitch. Oops. So I've got like two tiny little stitches on there. So make a long stitch. I'm going to come back halfway along because this is a slightly shorter line. Oops. It's really hard to do this and not get my hands in the way. Right, so I've made a long stitch and I've come back up halfway, and I'm just going to jump across and come back up there. So I'm making a tiny stitch, and what that's doing is it's couching down, it's just catching down that long thread. If you didn't do that, the threads would lift up and then it'd be a nightmare because you just keep catching it all the time, and you've not got the tension sort of right on your fabric. So a long stitch, so I've got a long W, it's going behind that button, so I make my long stitch and then I'm coming back up, this time about a third of the way. So I've got that long stitch there that I've made, long stitch, right, long stitch, I've come up here and I'm just jumping over that thread to make a tiny stitch that catches it down. Then I'm going to come up again a little bit further on, coming up at the right hand side, jumping over and going down at the left hand side. Oh, but not going round a button. So that's the problem with doing this tag roulette. You're getting things happening, like buttons and things like this would be the last thing that I would put on my actual piece. I should hold it a bit tight. Then finish it off at the back. So those are your 3 prompts for this month. You've got your Pekingese stitch to add a word or some words, and to have a go at doing a fringe on a back stitch. So I hope you're keeping up. Remember that there are the original videos. You've probably got your own tags if you took part in the challenge originally, to have a look at if you get stuck, and I will see you next week. No, I won't. I'll see you next month. Okay, bye. Happy stitching.